Okay, well, welcome everybody to another edition of the Psych Monologues. Yes, indeed, it is already 2 weeks later. I can't believe this. This is the nature of summer. Apparently, I thought the loss of time during the year was rapid and jarring. It's even more so in the summer. Of course, I am undertaking a huge writing project over the summer, so that eats up a lot of my time, on top of a lot of other things like enjoying Grand Lake and things like that with my family. And we've interspersed it across the summer, which makes it a little stutter step feeling, trying to get things done and move into various areas that I just don't have the time to get into during the school year. But be that as it may, here we are again. This is June 21st, so I am, like I said, I am a good 2 weeks behind. And I mentioned it during the last episode that it will be kind of catch as catch can. I think I'm going to do off and on throughout the summer a best of series, so that I'm going to be replaying some of the podcasts that have gotten the most downloads and responses. So if you missed anything from past episodes or you would like to hear one again, please DM me and let me know about that. I'd be happy to put it up. Buys me some time, as well as trying to refresh our topics coming up. I do have a very important interview coming up that will be broadcast. I don't know how else to say it, and provided in the podcast pretty soon. I'm not going to tip my hand just yet as to who it is. I think you'll find it very interesting and certainly challenging at times with the person that I'll be interviewing, and so that's what they call a tease. So what I want to do is provide you with one of the best of series, and this is the episode that was entitled The Comfort of Punishment. But before I do, just to get you all set, let you settle in, this is a Psych Monologues you're listening to if you're wondering what you stumbled onto. It's a podcast that explores the intersection of faith, psychology, and spiritual formation. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, relax. Let's talk about the issues that mean the most to you. And that's what my hope is with some of the topics that I actually choose. So we're going to be looking at and exploring the things that impact us where we live, what we think, how we feel, how we even think about how we feel, and what it's like living with others in Jesus and with ourselves for that matter. And that's a little bit of what tonight is going to be about. So get comfortable, and I will start up the podcast at a point where I introduce the topic. And there are a couple of references to previous dates. This particular one was done back in April, and we were just warming up to get to the end of the semester, at least as far as my schedule is concerned. So I hope you enjoy it. And here it is. So anyway, this is the thing that I want to talk about is the ease at which we accept grace. We say we live by grace, we are saved by grace, but it all falls apart and it's all thrown out the window when we fail or we don't meet the expectations that we think we should. And so we do the dog pile thing and pull out all the narratives and begin to berate ourselves and deprecate ourselves and do all manner of things because we're really honestly convinced. I'm pretty sure of this, and this is not you and me. This is you and it's us. It's all of us. And so the question I have is given our intolerance for mistakes and flaws, what do we do with that, and how do we prevent doing that? And so what I wanted to start with is spend some time talking a little bit about two different things: the active strategies we engage in and then the more passive ones we engage in, because the passive ones are ones we don't really attend to because they tend to sit in the background. And it's actually
passivity is about the lack of action, not the positive action toward things. But what I'll start out with the active strategies we use and really how we go about refusing to live by the grace that we say we are saved by. And somehow, somewhere along the way, we get this idea that there's more than enough grace to save me, but then I've got to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of that grace. And we don't even pay attention to all the shame narratives that we have running in our heads all the time. And really, if you think about it, it points to the wonder of how we operate. And this is a short bunny trail that you have the advantage of experiencing or disadvantage of having somebody that's a psychologist and understands how our thoughts and judgments and conclusions and all of that functions. And, Freud wasn't all that far off when he was talking about the unconscious, but not in the way that he talks about it. In the world of cognitive psychology, we talk about it as the cognitive unconscious. In other words, there are lots of things that are going on in our mind as we are having a conversation with somebody. So, in a sense, we are engaged in the external interaction with the person, but then there is an internal narrative and story that's constantly running in the background of our mind. And that's unconscious to us until something happens. Something pokes it, something triggers it, and suddenly it's there. And we say, wow, where did that come from? And little do we know it's been running in the background the entire time. And the interesting thing about this that I always play with in the strange world of Mitch world that I live in is that quite honestly, this is a human thing. This has been going on for a long, long time. As a matter of fact, it was going on during Jesus' time. And I would go even farther and say, we don't know, but Jesus experienced this same thing. And so the wonder and mystery of his divinity and his humanity kind of sits in this space that blows our minds when we really think about it. I mean, the question was he aware of the unconscious stuff that was going on in the brain that he was given? Because he was human. He had a human body, he had a human brain, he had all of that. And his perceptions were distinctively different, human but divine. And I'm not going to try to put that thing together, but his interactions and all with broken people in the Bible, and you just pick one, okay? The lepers that came to him, the man at the pool of Bethesda that had basically given up all hope that he would ever be healed. And the backstories to those people and the conclusions that they made about themselves. I mean, think about it. In Mark, we're given the story of the guy that is lame. He's paralyzed, and his friends, the good friends that they are, say, "Hey, we're taking you to go see Jesus," and he's saying, "No, don't do that." And they say, "Well, you don't have a choice. We're taking you anyway, and even more so, we can't get you to him, so we'll just bust through the roof and lower you to him." And think about all the things that are going on in those folks' minds. The paralyzed guy, his friends, the people that were looking up, even the things that Jesus was thinking that influenced and framed how they reacted to what was going on in that instance. Now, all of that, I bring all of that up just to say we humans have not changed really that much. I mean, we we always have this running in the background, and our experience adds to it, and our interactions and relationships with people adds to it, and it's all very much a part of what I'm referring to as a shame narrative. Now, let me define that real quickly, and then we'll move on from there. Because it's not a guilt narrative. It's a shame narrative. Because shame narratives are about the nature of who I am. It's the person of who I am that this narrative is making some statement about. It's a story about me as a person. It's not a story about my performance. It's a story about my personhood and who I am, the nature of who I am. Am I good? Am I bad? Am I flawed? Am I condemned? Whatever it is. Or am I defined by my sin? Just like I was talking about last week. It can be any number of things, but we have active strategies that we engage in that engage these shame narratives that fashion how we see other people, how we see ourselves, how we see God even, how we see God. So there are 3 or 4 different things I want to highlight for you tonight, just for your consideration, that are all very much a part of these active strategies that go into our intolerance for mistakes and how we actually respond to them. And the first one is we discount our positives. So, for example, you have somebody say, you have such great insight and perceptiveness, and I think in my mind, gosh, golly gee whiz, thanks a lot, or it's provided by God, or whatever, and we find some way to dismiss it. And one way to dismiss it is we actually discount it in our minds to say, oh, they're just being nice. They probably say that to everybody. And so the compliment that's connected to things positive about us, we simply dismiss. It's like water on a duck's back. Now, the funny thing about it is, if you find a critic, you'll spend all day with the critic because they'll say things that agree with that narrative you've got going in your head. Or the other thing I might say is, well, they don't know me the way I do. And the thing that I say a lot is that if they knew me the way I know me, they wouldn't be saying that. And therefore, when they're saying that, they're just being nice because it's not really truthful. What's really truthful is what I'm actually thinking about myself. Narrative. There it is again. So the last thing I'd say about this compliment thing and discounting our positives is what they're really doing is they're complimenting something that nobody really cares about anyway. So we now add a value statement to our positives, the things that are good about us. And we say, well, they're only emphasizing something that nobody really cares much about, and they're actually holding back. See, we do all this mind reading. The funny thing is, we're reading our own minds. We're not reading theirs. We're just reading our own, and then we're attributing it to somebody else. So the wonder of that God would actually reach into our world through other people's voices. In other words, he makes his presence known, which links up to what I was talking about last week. He makes his presence known through a human voice. Never really occurs to us. And so that's why so often we dictate to God what his presence is supposed to look like, how it's supposed to feel, and how I am supposed to be. I mean, and the funny thing about it is, if God himself came down and said these things, I would have a hard time. That's just, hey, it's just you and I would have a hard time. It's like, yeah, but I'd find some way to discount it. Here's another one. So we discount our positives, and the mirror image of this is that we magnify our flaws. So all the things that are bad about us, all the things that are, and I use that word intentionally because we see ourselves as bad. So we engage in all or nothing thinking. It's either I have all of these flaws, they're the things that define who I am, this is all I ever do, this is all I will ever be known as. So that's who I am. And all this other stuff, the stuff that people are saying nice stuff about, when it's weighed on a scale, it is always found wanting. So anything less than a stunning success is now a miserable failure. And it's not deep flaws, it's even surface flaws that make us fundamentally unacceptable. So a surface flaw defines my utter being. And see, here's another twist I think oftentimes that Christians wrestle with, is that since their human goodness amounts to nothing compared to God's goodness or Jesus' goodness, then it means nothing. It doesn't account for anything. It's not really God working in the world around us. So, and I've heard a lot of people do that. They have this tendency to compare what they do in light of what Jesus did or how Jesus did it, or that they're trying to represent Jesus and they can't live up to that absolutely impossible standard. It never occurs to them that it's an impossible standard, and it's their standard, I might add. Because if Jesus were doing that with the people that were around him, he would be busting them all the time, because it's like, hey, you're not doing it like I would, and if you're not, then it's just not good enough. And so Christians, as Christ followers, we have this false standard in our minds that somehow we have to be something other than human. Now, that's not an excuse, but it is a rational reason that I'm going to make mistakes. It doesn't define me fundamentally as who I am in my personhood. And the last thing I'd mention in terms of magnifying our flaws is the least of the weaknesses far, far outweigh the greatest of their strengths. And so again, like I said, if we put it on a balance, then those weaknesses far outweigh the strengths, and therefore they dominate the picture of what anybody can see. And even when people are complimentary to us, like I said, we have this internal kind of monologue running that says, yeah, but if you knew me the way I know me, you wouldn't be saying that. So therefore what you're saying is false. So there's that one. So like I said, it's discounting the positives, it's magnifying our flaws, and then there's judging ourselves by undefined ideals. And I've already mentioned this a little bit, but we have this unspecified obligation to be perfect. Now, most everybody would say, I'm not really a perfectionist. Have you seen the kind of stuff that I do? There's no way. But see, that's just it. It's not really... See, it's a funny thing we tend to do is when things like that are pointed out to us, we shift the frame and shift the focus so that it matches our way of thinking about it. So realistically, no, I can't attain perfection, but I still can hold myself to that standard. And so then I am always in a state of failure, because I can't live up to anything that is undefined. And that non-definition, I mean, the funny thing about it is some things are defined, right? And it's the flaws. We've got those clearly defined, so clearly defined that they are who we are. Now, the last thing I'll mention underneath this one, and this one is really, really big, because it fundamentally it's how we keep this balance in our heads. And so if I do something good and I'm proud of what I've done, I work hard, I get the outcome that I desire, and I'm feeling pretty satisfied with myself, and I appreciate the affirmation that I get for it. Suddenly there is this little germ that comes up in our brain that, particularly from a Christ follower, it says, careful, don't get too prideful. Don't get too prideful. Don't let that take over. And so what do? We don't just go to the depth. I mean, we don't just dial it back. We go to the depths. I mean, we pile on the self-deprecation and say, I'm nothing and God is everything and all of that. And while that all is true and a nice religious language to go along with it, we get so busted about being prideful that we can't even sit and appreciate the benefits of working hard and having a positive outcome as a result of the working hard. There's nothing morally wrong with that. And there's nothing morally wrong with appreciating the fruit of my labor of working hard. And so we're living in this constant tension where we can't get too prideful, but we can't get so humble, so humiliated that people start feeling sorry for us, or we start feeling pride over how humble we are. So we're doomed. I mean, we're damned if we do and damned if we don't when it comes to this whole thing. And particularly when I have an ideal that is completely undefined. I'm shooting at a target at 500 yards in the dark, blindfolded, and expecting myself to hit it. So there's that one. And then there's another one that we do, and this is more of a boundary issue than anything, is our tendency is to translate any criticism we get into a judgment of who we are, which makes it virtually impossible for us to get any feedback at all. Because, we're pretty good, I think, at distinguishing between constructive criticism, right, and destructive criticism, the kinds that tears us down and piles on all of this self-deprecation on top of us, and et cetera, and what an awful person we are, and et cetera, et cetera. But then when we get constructive criticism, things that help us to grow, that is motivated by somebody who is every bit as devoted to our growth as we are, and we get that criticism, and now we lapse into a shame hole because we can't do anything right. We'll never be enough. I can't live up to other people's expectations. What do you want from me? Because after all, I'm only worried about giving you what you want rather than seeking to achieve what I feel I'm moving toward. And so this idea of taking criticism and turning it into and interpreting it into a judgment of who we are, judgment in the negative terms, it blankets our whole being with one criticism that translates into us being an utter abject failure. Not that we had a failing performance, but we are a failure. Right there is an example of how shame works in our lives. So you hear somebody say, I'm just a horrible person, or I am the worst friend in the universe. And guess what happens the minute they say that to the other person? The other person says, oh, no, it's not that bad. It's okay. Thereby, in a sense, downplaying the effect of the other person's behavior on them. So it insulates them from change. Since the other person perceives all of this devastation that's occurred by giving them feedback, and what they end up doing is, I don't want you to feel bad, so I'm going to withhold this feedback that really is the only way that you can change. And this plays out time and time again. I can't tell you how often this plays out, where people pull their punches because they are so concerned about the other person's self-esteem taking a nosedive, and what they may or may not see, and the person who's experiencing this probably doesn't see it, is that when they translate it into that, they have insulated themselves from getting any feedback. because nobody wants to be responsible for somebody else feeling like an abject failure. So now they take responsibility for the other person's feelings, and now we've got in a completely enmeshed relationship that goes by a very silent collusion, an agreement under the table that says, I will protect your self-esteem if you protect mine. Instead of your self-esteem is your own responsibility. You have to work that stuff out. If I'm in a relationship and I do something, I stick my foot in my mouth, or I come on too strong, or my sarcasm gets out of hand, and they say in so many words, ouch, that hurt. And then I sink into abject failure, I can't do anything right, etc., versus thank you for the feedback. I wouldn't have known it any other way. So, and this is our own little strategies. I mean, we can do this both ways. We can talk about how somebody reacts and relates to us, but perhaps I can see myself in some of these too. I can. A lot of these. That one particularly, I was a pro at insulating myself against other people's feedback, and essentially developed the relationship around that to such a degree that other people felt more responsible for my sense of self than I was responsible for it. And I recognize that, and it's a hard insight to come to. It's difficult, because am I going to be resilient enough in my own sense of self to be able to take feedback and grow from it? The only way that I can do that is by embracing the grace that I'm offered. See, grace creates a space for us to learn, because it's not about our failure or our personhood that's on the line. It's about changes in our performance that need to be made. And I can look at that and say, I probably need to do that differently. You're right. So there's translating criticism into a judgment of myself. And then the last one I wanted to mention is that we read our own shame into others' perceptions of us. So people's perception of us is an indication of just what a terrible person I am. So we assume others have the same negative feelings about us that they feel about us, that we feel about us. Like I said earlier, we tend to take those and attribute them to other people, and then that we blame them. Now we won't go too far out on that limb, partly because blaming somebody else is also forbidden in our culture. You don't do that, although that's changing. So you don't do that. You take personal responsibility, but sometimes I can take so much, quote unquote, air quotes here, so much responsibility that I take responsibility for everything that's bad around me, and then I sink into a hole of shame. So what happens with this little one is that my tendency is to read my shame in other people's perceptions of me. And what ends up happening is now I am paying attention and parsing out the variety of things that people say. What did they mean by that? What didn't they say? What their facial expressions were, to confirm everything that I believe is true about me, namely what the shame piece is all about. So a lot of times they'll end up seeing in other people what they feel about themselves, and they don't really even recognize that, or we don't recognize that. And so there's a few different ones here that we've looked at. What we do in terms of discounting our positives, how we magnify our flaws or amplify them. We hold ourselves to undefined ideals. We translate criticism into a judgment of our person and being. And then lastly, we read our own shame into other people's perceptions of us. Now, one last thing I want to mention, and then I'll try to land this plane, is why do we do this? Why is it so comfortable? And quite honestly, it's a pretty simple answer. It's predictable, and it's known and expected. So we've grown accustomed that this is the rules of the road of a relationship. So if I can delineate and be clear about what these rules of the road are, this is just how you interact with people. This is what everybody does. And so if it's predictable, then I know what's going to happen. I have a pretty good idea how to protect myself from it. And I also know that the conclusion that comes out of it is always the same. It's always that I'm an idiot and I can't do anything right. And so it's known and expected. The interesting thing that we add to all of this is that there is really only one way to change behavior. So we have a variety of things that impact all of this, but we always have only one strategy for changing it. You know what it is? Punishment. We learn very early on that if somebody has done something wrong, somebody needs to be punished. And in most of these cases, what our conclusions always are is that I am the one that has to be punished. And so how do I do that? Well, I can do a lot of different things. I can pick a fight with somebody, get them mad at me, and then say privately to myself, see, you deserve that. That's what was coming anyway, so that's the punishment for being the kind of person that you are. And so punishment, let me be really clear. Punishment works. It does. Now, it doesn't work in the positive. It doesn't work to help us grow, but it works within the system that I'm describing, and it changes things in the short term. It doesn't change anything in the long term, because we end up falling into a cycle of punishment, guilt and shame and self-deprecation and self-humiliation and self-degradation. And then that is part of the punishment I experience, and that happens over time, and eventually I get weary of that, and I say, okay, time to get moving again. And then I start back on the road until what? Another thing occurs that I did it again. And so we're cruising for more and more evidence for our conviction, and the conviction is always the same. So punishment works in the short term, but it doesn't in the long term. And I have often said, I have yet to see anybody change behavior on the long term under the conditions of shame, ever. And punishment is part of it. But under the conditions of grace, long-term change can occur. Now, the other thing about this is why it's so comfortable. It fits, it resonates with what we already believe about ourselves. So there's nothing new under the sun. We just say, well, sooner or later it will come out. It will be the same thing I've been teaching myself, indoctrinating myself in all of this time. And see, there it is again. I am what I thought I was, and these people are just agreeing with me. And it creates this false illusion that I am actually controlling my behavior and the outcomes of that behavior. That's why it's so comfortable, because we can fool ourselves into thinking that our behavior is actually changing. Now, realize I'm not saying that it doesn't change in the short term. It does, but for a time. And then we begin to experience drift, and we're not quite so vigilant, and we take our foot off the gas of pushing hard to make the changes that we want to make. And so we build this illusion, and before too long, we're so committed to the illusion than we are to the reality of the loss of change or the things that aren't changing, and I need to recalibrate and get back to it. So there are all of those active kind of things that we tend to do. The passive ones are, like I said, a little bit tougher to identify because they're the absence of certain behaviors, like withdrawing and waiting to see if the other person is going to follow, if they're going to come back and check with me to see that you're okay, or the silent treatment. The silent treatment only works if there is a willing participant in that silent treatment. If somebody goes silent and you're supposed to know what's going on inside of them to change your behavior, if you're saying, I can't change something I don't know, I'm not willing, the person's not willing to be direct and honest enough to tell me what's actually going on, then I'm not going to read their mind. They can be that way. Go for it. Enjoy your silence. Actually, it might perpetuate something good by accident. So the silent treatment, and even withdrawing, oftentimes is a manipulative way to get somebody to participate in our little indoctrination program of just how bad we actually are. And so the last thing I'll mention of the passive, and there's lots more, but I'm running long on my time here, but see, we cultivate a mythology that whatever good comes my way won't last. So if it's all going to fall apart eventually, I may as well have it fall apart on my terms rather than have it occur without any of my control. And so there's always this. Brene Brown refers to it as impending joy. So I have good things that are happening in my relationship with somebody, and what do we say? It's, well, this is just too good to be true. And so I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And what happens is the longer I look up waiting for the other shoe to drop, I'm not paying attention to the good that's at my feet. And so some passive strategies. Now, why is this such a threat to our spiritual formation? To put it bluntly, we think we are entirely responsible for the outcome of our spiritual journey and formation. We forget about the fact that God has said, whatever Jesus has started in you, he will bring it to completion. He doesn't say, you work real hard and we'll judge your outcome at the end. And so this sabotages our best efforts to participate in the change that we want to see. But remember, change always has mistakes in it. It always has potholes and a minefield and all these other things. I said this to somebody just recently. Since when, and the person I was talking to was an athlete, since when has ever a team or a person engaged in a match or a game, since when has there ever been a game that is completely flawless? Most winning games are riddled with mistakes. Riddled with mistakes. We're never really sure which mistake is going to make the difference between winning and losing. But a slice in time. A slice in time. It is a slice in time when I make a mistake or I stub my toe or I really jack things up pretty badly. It's a slice in time. It is not a prediction of time. So it threatens our spiritual formation because essentially we are making a prediction of outcome, and inadvertently or even intentionally we are creating a prophecy that we will fulfill. So for some people, they would say, well, does it really matter that my motivation, what my motivation is, as long as my behavior changes? Yeah, actually it does. Actually it does. Because Jesus went so far as to say, it doesn't matter what goes into a man's body, what comes out of his mouth, out of his heart. that determines the actual change in behavior. I mean, he was surrounded by people that were constantly working on changing behavior. And they were the ones that were so rule-driven that he was busting them all the time. And they were probably scratching their heads saying, wait a minute, Jesus, I thought this was how the game went. I thought this was how it's supposed to go. So the challenge of engaging in our spiritual formation and embracing the grace that we're being offered as humans that make mistakes is to use mistakes and leveraging these things that we do to continue to grow rather than seek perfection, and expecting those mistakes to occur and doing what we can to not catastrophize those into something that is a prediction of catastrophe, which is all very much a part of that. And so it's continuing to learn, which I think we probably have to do some more conversation around, is exactly what does grace mean? It's not a get out of jail card. It has nothing to do with that. As a matter of fact, that kind of grace is cheap. It's weak. It's easy grace. It's like, just give me grace so that I don't have to pay any consequences. And ultimately, anybody that participates or cooperates with that is saying, I don't really care about your growth. All I care about is you just change your behavior. That's all. Because growth means making mistakes. It means learning. It has to be that way. And our participation in our own spiritual formation is riddled with all of these things that I've been talking about. It's not just a spiritual weightlifting contest. It is about trust and a commitment to tolerating our humanness, our mistakes, and our sinfulness, our brokenness, and how twisted it can become. And then again, embracing the grace that we're offered so that we can be free to try it again without condemning ourselves and who we are. So that's it for tonight. A couple program reminders that I always engage in just to remind you, if you have questions, if there's something I've said that triggers a thought, please get on the website and put it in your comments or your questions there on the website at drmitch.com, or you can DM me the question on Instagram. Subscribe by following the website. Like I said, at drmitch.com, MITSCH. Or you can interact with us in a variety of ways. And I say us because I've got a little team that helps me kind of stay on top of the social media. I stay away from that as much as I possibly can. So for Instagram, we can be found at the Psych Monologues. At Facebook, ray.mitch, and LinkedIn, drmitch. So any one of those platforms we can be found in. If you want to subscribe to the podcast, you can do that wherever you consume podcasts: Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio. Any number of those can be found, and that's where you can subscribe to the the podcast. If you like it and you are blessed by it, encouraged by it, challenged by it, irritated by it, leave us a review. Leave us a review. I got to do what I'm saying about that I just talked about. I've got to be open to the kind of feedback that you can offer me in terms of having this be feeding your soul and feeding the development of your heart. And then finally, if you want to partner with us, we would be most appreciative of you partnering with us to continue to grow the scholarship fund for our silent retreats. CCU students right now are the benefactors of that and are the beneficiaries of that. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. And so if you want to help us grow the scholarship so that it's affordable, it's not a cheap thing to do the silent retreats. And any one student, the cost would be $360. that's no small amount for a poverty-stricken college student who's trying to work, go to school, and all these other things. So any gift that you could give us would be very much appreciated. On the website, under CCU Silent Retreats, at the very bottom, there's a Donate Now button. And you can donate once, you can donate on a regular basis. We would appreciate both to make these retreats possible. We have one coming up in May, and we're pretty underfunded. So anything that you're willing to do to help us out on that would be much appreciated. All of your gifts are tax deductible, and continue to develop a platform and an ability for us to continue to do these silent retreats and to do more of them in the future. If you'd rather write a check for it, that's cool. You can do that. Just make your checks out to 1615.tv and address your envelope to send it to us in exactly the same way. 1615.tv, P.O. Box 1777, Castle Rock, Colorado 80104. Well, wow, I really ran over. There was lots to talk about with this particular one, and the role that how we go about dismissing and diminishing the very voice of God, I believe, in our lives that is trying to affirm and encourage us, even in our humanness. And that's how the body was supposed to work in the first place. So, given the question I started out this evening with is, given our intolerance for mistakes and flaws, what strategies do we use to punish ourselves? And how do we appropriate the grace that is offered us to make the kind of changes we want to make in our relationships, in our relationship with Christ, in our relationship with ourselves even, and the impact that has. So thanks for joining me tonight. I really do appreciate it and your time. Hopefully I have not overstayed my welcome. And join us again next week for another exciting adventure into the spiritual formation and psychology and the nature of who we are in Christ and our relationship with God. So until then, thanks for joining me. Love ya. Later. Bye.